y'all, it's your girl here with the facts. I decided to make this video because I've noticed that in recent life events, a lot of my online friends are thinking, or at least semi-joking about moving to New Zealand. And to get to the point of things, I feel like you should at least know what it's like from an insider's perspective, as not every square inch of the place is jumping with hobbits and shires and bountiful natures full of Kiwis. So I'm making a list. I'm checking it twice, and I'll be reading off all our qualities, naughty and nice. Because before you all start coming to town, I feel like you really all should be doing just a tad bit of independent background research here, regardless of how desperate things may be. So, starting from our worst through to our best, and then ending on completely neutral, because, I feel like y'all should be making up your own minds on this. Here we are, starting with our top 6 worst things about living in this country. Number 1 being visas. Now, granted, this isn't the absolute number 1 worst thing there, but I do feel like it's the most important one for you to know. Securing and maintaining your place here in Aotearoa is by no means an easy feat. It will be varying different levels of difficulty depending on who you are. Ideally, someone highly qualified, rich and single, so that you can then marry off into the economy, has the best chances of being able to stay here, but honestly, I can't tell you how hard it's going to be. Each individual application to stay here gets measured on a case-by-case basis, and as someone who doesn't even have her own passport yet, let alone ever at all, I feel like all I can do is warn you. I've seen friends, acquaintances and various different people on the internet trying to make sure they stay here, and dude, are you sure you really want to go through that whole ordeal? I mean, are you sure there's not somewhere else, anywhere else, that might potentially be easier to get into? Number 2 is the cost of things. New Zealand isn't the most expensive country in all the world out there, but if it's one thing my international friends have commented on, it's the cost of buying simple items of food versus what you actually get paid. Heck, even I can attest to this one. I was chatting to one of my cousins online a wee while back, and they were talking like pies over here were still like $1 or $2.70. What pie have I ever bought that cost that? I don't know whether it's the cost of where I live, but the average New Zealand pie, coffee, or just snack in general costs around about $5 these days. Even in the last few months, the local petrol station I was getting my very small hot chocolate from ended up raising the price at least twice by a whole extra $1 in the few weeks to months I was buying from them. And I don't know whether that's just because I was a regular customer, so they thought they had the demand for it, or whether it's just the changing times, but it's more than safe to say that I'm not a customer for them anymore. Our wages aren't matching the cost of things to live, and granted, our government is trying to raise the minimum wage for things to help make it better, but as I've elaborated in one of my older previous videos, it never actually does much. Okay, so topic number 3, employment. I've been actively searching for a job with some level of security for, well, close to 10 years now, and I've only just now managed to find a permanent one that pays for my share of the bills, and one I feel like I can actually stay in. It's not a full-time job, and I don't know how it's going to be affected by the upcoming recession and extent of COVID, and I still have a lot of insecurity just by simply trying to get a job for, 10 plus years now, wondering whether I might wake up one day and I just don't have a job anymore. Or maybe whether they suddenly decide they don't like me and I get cleverly gotten rid of. I don't know what it is about New Zealand's pure impossibility regarding actually getting something, anything at all, but honestly, just go to Australia. We lose so many Kiwis non-stop just for that reason alone. Number 4, an extreme lack of opportunity. Oh, so you actually managed to get hired this time? Congratulations! What an extreme miracle! So what are you qualified in? Oh, nothing? Yeah, good luck trying to get anything that's actually realistic as a long-term career with the pay to match. You're lucky you even got hired at all. Number 5. So it probably doesn't come as any surprise whatsoever that this next point we're going to be covering is poverty, or a bit more accurately, child poverty. Wait, what do you mean child poverty? Children don't even have any income. Surely if the child's poor, that's an indication that the whole family is. Oh honey, I wish it were that simple. Basically what child poverty is when a typically lower class people end up having a kid, and we all know that once you have a baby, it's not just a one-stop expense, it's endless expenses, and you never seem to have any time, life, or even material items of your own anymore. So maybe the adults can't cope, maybe they resent the child being there, or maybe they just want to get away from it the only way they know how, which means that any such money they may have, that all goes into buying alcohol and drugs. Literally anything they can get their hands on as a form of escapism, they do, so the kid never gets any food, clothes, or school supplies. Horrible? Definitely. Should they get their kid taken off them? Most likely, but that would be springing us headfirst into the whole controversy surrounding the endless child snatchings of Oranga Tamariki, and I feel like that's a topic deserving of its own video. So basically, we've only got one last negative point I'm willing to cover about New Zealand, and it's our mental health. It ain't great, mate! We have so many people literally crying out for help, and even the emergency help wait lists are so long, there's practically no point being on them. We've got fully trained and qualified psychologists having to retrain for different careers just to get a job, yet if it's one thing we most desperately need, it's more counsellors. Our youth suicide rate is in the top 24 on a global scale, and if you'd like a bit more context on that, we're even higher up the charts in America of all places, and not by a small amount either. That's a really large gap. People do care about mental health here in New Zealand, or at least they say they do, but I'm worried we don't care enough, or could even afford for it that matter either. I tried searching for counselling in the middle of a crisis last year or so, and the amount it would have cost me, heck, even if I doubled, tripled my wage now, I still wouldn't be able to afford it. And this is now, when I'm actually on a stable income and can afford to even eat. So while you're all dwelling on that miserably depressing thought, I'd like to now move on to all the good things about New Zealand. Yep, we do have some redeeming qualities after all that. Number one being that you don't necessarily fear for your life here. Other than, of course, the suicide and extreme mental health rates, we are not a country at war, except with maybe ourselves. We are not Syria, Palestine, or even America. Heck, you can walk down the street and not get gunned down by anyone. We don't even have any reigning dictators here either. Number two is all things venomous, poisonous, and toxic. I mean, we've got maybe 2 spiders that count as poisonous, but one mainly lurks far away inside nooks and crannies on some of our most obscure beaches, and all the interactions I've had with the other one has just mostly been me scooping it up with a glass to put outside. The 2 poisonous spiders we have here are actually really chill. I'd honestly be more concerned about the wasps than them. Which brings me on to point 3, bare feet. Maybe it might not be such a big deal to other countries and ethnicities, but here we love to walk around in bare feet, and we don't even get judged much for it either. I mean, obviously, if you're walking into a corporate office somewhere, or maybe someplace very upper class, you should probably wear a shoe of some sort, but being able to feel the sun on your bare toes, grass underfoot is really an underrated pleasure of living on this shared planet we're all here on. Which brings me to point 4, our climate. In comparison to where other countries are at, New Zealand, I feel, has a very neutral climate. You can choose to live far north where it's warmer, or far south where you'll get some snow occasionally. But other than Wellington, which is of course extreme winds all the time, New Zealand is pretty reasonable in regards to the weather. Unless it's winter transitioning to spring, then you'll probably be better off growing a set of gills for all the rain. Now, for our last few points, we've got population density. You get to choose. You can live either in the middle of butt freaking nowhere, or right in the heart of our cities, but even our cities are still nowhere near the levels of insane of maybe China or Malaysia. I feel like despite no one area being perfect, when you look at the way some of our cities lay themselves out, what with nature and community spaces and all, it can really be quite beautiful. I remember walking down one street in Wellington this one time, just being in awe of how I was in the middle of the city, yet you'd look up and see these full-out forests right next to all the houses and buildings. Or how on one street it honestly did feel like we were walking into the beginning of a forest because of how cleverly they'd interwoven all the paths and streets through the trees. I wish I could share memories with you all, because that there is a memory so beautiful I will hold on to it for the rest of my life. When you know where to look, New Zealand really does have the capacity to be truly breathtaking. Our last point, and what I personally feel is one of the best, is that citizens of New Zealand don't have to pay any interest on their student loans. Well, not unless they leave the country anyway. If you can stick it out in New Zealand for like 2 or 3 years, you can apply for citizenship, and once you've got that, all university courses will be so much cheaper. Heck, I even think there's like a completely free university as well somewhere down in the South Island. Definitely worth checking out if you're looking to upskill yourself. Alright now, creatures and cryptids of the internet, we've had the terrible, we've had the good. Now it's time for the truly neutral. Are the following qualities ones you feel you can live with? Could they be the potential make or break of choosing to come and live here? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and share this video around as well. Alrighty now, point number 1, the one that is truly the most neutral, and that is politics. New Zealand has a very, you can guess, a neutral way of going about their politics. I could say good, but we still have ye olde ways of not completely honest policies, new laws and bills being snuck in under the carpet. Basically, it's not great, but it's passable. And if you shout loud enough, there's actually a fair chance you might even be heard and considered too, which is at least something. Second most neutral point is our not quite island culture. Some people see it as good, others not quite so much. But if it's one thing my international friends have noticed is how laid back we all are. We're not exactly at the levels of, just turn up any time you want, bro. This important government meeting will just work right around you. But we do have this very tried and true mentality of, she'll be right, mate, which basically means whatever happens, it happens, and we'll get there in some shape or form regardless. Our third neutrality point is, of course, the nature. New Zealand, as I have already said, has the capacity to be really beautiful. If you know where to look, I feel like New Zealand does tend to over-exaggerate this on an international level though. We are not all streams and meadows and endless rural farmlands like we may make out. We have our towns, our cities, and also our ghettos. There is still litter and our grungy places, and while we may definitely be up there on the aesthetic as heck charts, we are not what you think we are. Next point is our prejudice. Now, how on earth is this a neutral point and not a bad one? I hear you all wondering. Well, that's because New Zealand has a very soft, discreet form of prejudice. Whether it's our racism, our good old-fashioned values, or whatever other form we're taking, it's not like we're going to hunt you down and actively murder you over it. New Zealand's resentment mostly takes the form of haughty comments about what's wrong with the place, or pixelated arguments on Facebook. We might ring up a talk show radio channel to have a gripe about things maybe, but most New Zealanders have enough sense in their heads to not start throwing hands in the middle of the street and end up going viral all over social media for it. Our resentments are more subtle, and we know how to take things snidely. Now, despite one of my earlier points I made on New Zealand being quite small in regards to potentiality and opportunities, we are still safe. If you're looking for a place to integrate with and get things done in, New Zealand can be quite convenient for that. The amount of international students I know who turn up, stick it out for long enough time to get their citizenship, get the cheap courses done, and then pay off their student loans might not be a number I'm willing to disclose, but if you just want to hash it out, and stick out the student loan until you can find a much more suitable job overseas, then it's definitely something worth considering. I will say it's a long game though. It's a safe game, but a long one. Our last point, and potentially our least neutral one, is our benefit culture, and it's one a lot of New Zealanders have their own clashing thoughts and opinions on. Now, I obviously have my own very strong opinions about the New Zealand benefit of any sort, but they have been voiced in one of my previous videos. I believe it's called How I Got to Here. There's two main viewpoints, however. Our first and probably most common one is, nah bro, just go on the benefit, she'll be right mate. And our second one being, there's no life good for nothing. They just scab off all my hard-earned taxpayer dollars, smoking weed and never amounting to anything. New Zealand has a lot of resentment against those who cannot or might not want a job for whatever reason, but we have even more resentment against our perpetual and never-ending poverty. The New Zealand job seeker support I have found to be the most demeaning things I have ever been reduced to. We have whole entire Facebook communities, one of our most notable one being called We Are Beneficiaries, which documents the conditions to which our most vulnerable are being subject to. And I'm not sure whether it's a symptom of New Zealand's overall mental health, lack of possibilities and accessible potential, or even just the pure depressingness of how hard it is to get a job you can actually afford to live off. But the benefit can prove to be very lucrative and beneficial to you if you scam off it. New Zealand has entire generations worth of families whose entire living has been carried out on the benefit. They know exactly what to do and say to make sure they get their payout, and with the government wanting to try and crack down on that, literally everyone else has been caught in the crossfire. Unless you're basically a top-level scammer and know exactly what to do and how, I wouldn't recommend taking your chances on the benefit. It's honestly not worth it. And it sucks that we have to be like that and are literally driving out some of our most vulnerable to be stealing from others or doing who knows what else. But which is worse, honey? Having to choose between feeding your kid this week or getting evicted? Or maybe feeling trapped inside a country that offers no real potential appealing enough for you. Not a lot of jobs that pay enough to really live on. I don't know. We as a nation have a lot of resentment against those who are too lazy to do anything other than just be on the benefit. But I can't help but wonder if that's just a symptom of a much bigger picture. Regardless though, that's the end of my incredibly long and ranty truth about New Zealand video, so have fun trying to watch it all. If you liked it, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell button, and let's see how many friends we can share this to. And I will see you all next week.